After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union fought in a multi-decade Cold War. The Cold War outlasted 9 presidents, the first man to walk on the moon, the first woman in space, Kennedy's assassination, the Vietnam War, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. The two countries engaged in a massive arms race. Between them, they built enough bombs and missiles to blow up the world 27 times each. This naturally led to the two countries being very afraid of a nuclear or atomic bomb attack. One of the permanent images of the Cold War is Bert the Turtle communicating to kids good death shielding technique and bomb drills.
He knew just what to do. He's duck and cover, duck and cover.
One of the most defining moments of the Cold War was the Cuban Missile Crisis, starting on October 14, 1962, and ending less than 2 weeks later. It all started with the photo. The photo was taken by the National Photographic Interpretation Center, or NPIC. They used U-2 spy planes that could fly 13 miles above the Earth and take pictures for many miles in a single trip. Dino Brugioni, a senior analyst, noticed in one specific picture that there were launch pads and trailers big enough to carry and install Soviet SS-4 ballistic missiles in Cuba. Ballistic missiles were missiles big and powerful enough to be launched into near space and fall on a ballistic path towards their targets. SS-4 were medium range, meaning they could reach a huge swath of the United States, including the capital and the entire southeast. American officials immediately went to work to figure out what to do and quickly blockaded Cuba with naval warships. Soon all Soviet ships carrying nuclear missiles turned around and headed for home except for one submarine. The lone B-59 submarine had lost communication with Soviet leadership days before and had no clue what was happening above the surface, including the blockade. Sensing hostile intent from the Soviet sub, American Navy ships forming the blockade started dropping anti-submarine depth charges to the starboard and port of the submarine, rocking it back and forth, trying to warn them and get them to turn around. What the American Navy did not know was that on top of the Soviet submarine was a nuclear torpedo as powerful as a bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and it was ready for launch. Inside of the submarine, Captain Valentin Grigorovich Savitsky and Captain Vadim Orlov were given the order to fire the torpedo, but the Soviet Navy followed a very specific protocol for nuclear launches that said that all 3 senior officers had to unanimously agree in order to launch. 2 of the 3 officers agreed to launch, but the 3rd officer, Vasily Alexandrovich Archipov, dissented. He calmly talked the other 2 officers down, telling them that the depth charges were not a direct attack. If Archipov, cut off from communication to Soviet leadership, had not said no to launching the torpedo, the weapon would have vaporized a U.S. destroyer or aircraft carrier. Because of close calls of the Cuban Missile Crisis, all due to poor communication, the American and Soviet governments agreed to install nuclear telephones to directly connect the Pentagon to the Kremlin. Contrary to popular belief, the nuclear telephone was not actually a red telephone. It resembled a black typewriter and it stayed in a cabinet. Why did people think it was red?
Bond. James Bond.
In the James Bond novel Moonraker, Ian Fleming wrote about the thrill of the red telephone. And in 1964's Dr. Strangelove, there is a Moscow to Washington call on a presumably red phone.
Now then, Dmitri, you know how we've always talked about the possibility of something going wrong with the bomb.
There have been many red telephones used in tense political situations. They just did not run between Moscow and Washington. President Jimmy Carter, for example, used a red telephone to negotiate the release of hostages with Iran. 21 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, on September 26, 1983, the Soviet military had caused a major international incident.
The killing of 269 innocent people aboard a Korean jumbo jet that drifted into Soviet territory. Tomorrow's headlines are screaming with outrage at the attack on Flight 007 in what's become known as the shooting over Sakhalin.
3 weeks later, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov of the Soviet Union's Air Defense Forces was manning the overnight shift. An alarm sounded indicating that the U.S. had launched 5 nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs. He acted quickly since U.S. missiles could reach the Soviet Union in a little over 20 minutes. Petrov had been trained to inform higher authorities about the alarm, but things were not adding up to him. He was trained to expect an all-out nuclear assault from the U.S., so it seemed a little odd to him that they had only launched 5 missiles. Plus, the Soviet nuclear detection system was fairly new and he did not yet completely trust it. Ironically, it was not the nuclear telephone that saved us. Petrov let 23 minutes pass, long enough to know that no missiles had detonated inside the Soviet Union. He did not work towards a counterattack. The world was once again saved from nuclear war, not by new communication technology, but by an officer's gut feeling. The nuclear telephone turned to email in 2007. Russia and the United States now send emails updating their nuclear status to each other once an hour. But nuclear mishaps do not always have global consequences. Titan II missiles were the apex of the American nuclear arsenal, liquid-fueled 103-foot ICBMs that had launched men into space and could be launched from underground silos in 60 seconds to rain fire on targets anywhere in the world. Each missile's warhead was as powerful as all the bombs dropped in World War II, including the atomics, times 3. Titan II silos were located around Tucson, Arizona, Wichita, Kansas, and Little Rock, Arkansas. On the evening of September 20th, 1980, 2 airmen conducting routine maintenance on their Titan II missile near Damascus, Arkansas, accidentally dropped a wrench socket from their scaffold. The socket fell 80 feet before ricocheting off the side of the silo and punching a hole in the side of the rocket. The rocket began leaking oxidizer nitrogen tetroxide, a Class A poison that would burn skin on contact. And if the oxidizer were to touch the rocket fuel stored in a different tank in the rocket, it would explode. The 2 men did not communicate their mistake to anyone for a full 30 minutes. By that point, there was nothing they could do to avert disaster, and communications between senior officers were erratic. They were told to evacuate the silo immediately, but later airmen were ordered back into the silo. At 1 a.m., the missile silo exploded. The silo's door, a 1.5 million pound slab of concrete and steel, was found 500 feet away. The nuclear warhead was found undetonated a quarter of a mile away in a ditch. A similar event happened in our own backyard. In 1978, near Wichita, Kansas, airmen noticed a damaged valve remained open after a refueling hose was removed from a Titan II missile. Enough oxidizer leaked to form a toxic red vapor cloud 3,000 feet high and 1 mile long. No explosion took place, but the authorities were forced to evacuate all residents of nearby Rock, Kansas. The incident injured 37 people and killed 2. These are far from the only nuclear accidents or near misses during the Cold War. The Pentagon recognizes 33 nuclear accidents.
I got a document through the Freedom of Information Act that lists more than 1,000 accidents and incidents involving nuclear weapons just between 1950 and 1968.
Most of these accidents had one thing in common: lack of communication. We have tried to take this problem on with strategies like the nuclear telephone, but we've also tried to reduce the number of nuclear weapons through the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT agreements. SALT I focused on limiting ICBMs and anti-ICBM weapons for both the Soviet Union, now Russia, and the United States. SALT II opened in late 1972 and ultimately signed in 1979 by President Jimmy Carter, and the Soviet Communist Party General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev spelled the end of the Titan II. SALT II was not observed until 1982 because of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in December of 1979. But beginning then, Titan II missiles were systematically destroyed, ending the threat of being blown up by a 342,000-pound nuclear missile. As nuclear weapons have become increasingly more destructive and advanced, the machines and facilities that store them have not kept up. Up until 2016, airmen manning nuclear missile silos still carried around physical 5.25-inch floppy disks to control them. In 2010, at Wyoming's Francis E. Warren Air Force Base, lost communication with 50 solid-fueled Minuteman III nuclear missiles for 45 minutes because of a single hardwire failure. And out-of-date facilities have not been physically maintained.
To the capsule. They can't close it because of a broken part, so it's propped open with a crowbar and marked with a danger tag.
Through the course of human events, technologies have become faster, smarter, and more reliable, but humans have not. You can create checklists to prevent mistakes from happening, but disasters are caused by mundane factors that can't always be anticipated. The threat of nuclear weapons will never disappear until the weapons themselves do. This is why, for now, the world is always at a risk of being destroyed by a simple miscommunication.
Someone's gonna bring me round. This is